We look at a tri-bladed monstrosity that I built.
This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed.
Recently, we looked at a Klingon canon weapon, the Kligat, a small tri-bladed weapon that resembles or that behaves a bit like a katar and therefore offers quite some strategies for Klingon sword and Klingon butlet fighting. And I thought, hey, what if we butletize this weapon? So if we make this weapon more butlet-like in the sense of let's make it larger. How would this behave? It would be basically a giant weapon with 3 blades. And when we discussed Thanos' sword, so from Avengers, this was a 2-bladed weapon, and I already recognized that it has some of the properties of a butlet when moving. So if we would have a tri-bladed one, a giant Kligat in principle, would this also behave a bit like a butlet? And in order to test that, I simply built 2 props, one by connecting 3 real machetes for some cutting tests, and 1 out of 3 EVA swords that I had cut down for some other build projects. And here you see the result. Concerning the cutting capabilities, it's a bit similar to what we had with Thanos sword. You have to have one hand at a handle of one of these machetes, and it's important that you take it in a way that the next machete backside of the blade is close to your forearm. On a first view, you might get the impression that this could be something like a giant push dagger, but it's in fact not, because push daggers are around 90 degrees off the hand, and this is something like 60 degrees off the hands. Also, the construction that I did here, fixing them with duct tape, will not allow me to produce a lot of force, so I think this thing is not an illegal build that I did, and also it's already disassembled again. Don't get wrong ideas here. I grab now with one hand the backside of one of these blades, similar how I did it with the Thanos sword, and then I can perform controlled cuts. And the interesting thing is that we will now have 2 blades coming in at 100 degrees angle differences, and so we usually have always 2 cuts right after each other. This is something that now again resembles my idea from the butlet. When you cut with the butlet with the one side, if you have not seen my video on butlet mechanics, it's linked in the description box. I can cut with one edge, and then immediately after that the tips from the other side come in, and here we have a similar effect. So in fact the giant Kligat has some of the properties of the butlet. Otherwise, how does it behave in free fight if we take the PU foam version? We can also see here some similarities to the butlet, because with the butlet we had the effect that whatever we did, one of the tips of the butlet would face the opponent in a bind situation. And we basically have the same impression when it comes to this giant Kligat. It's not always easy to get in these situations, and I expect that I would sometimes poke myself with this thing, which interestingly did not happen. We had already seen that with the Thanos sword, where I also expected that I would hit myself with the other end, and it did not. It was not the case, and here we also don't find that, which is definitely an interesting observation. The force you can generate with this thing is a bit limited. You have to swing it quite a bit to really displace the weapon of the opponent, but that's due to this smaller angle. With the butlet and with the Thanos sword, you have 180 degrees in principle between the two sides, and here it's only 120 degrees, which gives us less way to accelerate the weapon, and therefore the resulting force is also smaller. Overall, I was surprised how easy it is with this weapon, because what you basically do, you try to catch or receive the incoming blade, then it turns to a certain degree, and by that one of the tips rolls to the front, and then you can just stab into the opponent. So I don't think it's so far off. Overall, if we look at this construction, we can even see that there are some historical comparisons possible. I already pointed out with the Kligat that basically the arrangement arrangement of the blades there have something to do with the katar with two sidearms. And there are larger versions of Indian parry weapons that use such a kind of arrangement. If you think of the Madu and similar parrying weapons, they have basically two, not blades, but you know what I mean, sticking upwards and downwards, and some of them are additionally equipped with a blade pointing towards the front. So there are parrying weapons out there that have three blades in India. And this giant Kligat definitely also goes in this direction. Therefore, the strategy that I just described, trying to receive with this weapon the incoming force and then turning one tip towards the opponent, definitely matches this overall idea of the Indian parry weapons. So although this started out like a quirky idea, we got something in the end that makes some historical sense. Question is, of course, why don't we see something like the Kligat in real life? Yeah, so the angles in the Indian parrying weapons, where you have 90 degrees between the three blades and 180 degrees on the user side, makes much more sense, because although it did not really happen, it feels strange that one of the blades here with the giant Kligat always points a bit in my direction, so I can see that. Overall, weapons with three blades sticking out in different directions are horrible to transport. How do you carry this thing? You cannot simply hang it on your belt. And if you think about the discussion that has been waged online by a lot of experts about complex hilts versus simple hilts, and that the simple hilt is probably a reason, or came into being or was popular because of the sword being a sidearm and so not being too annoying to carry it around, we can immediately guess if something like a giant Kligat would have existed, it would not have been popular because carrying it around is a horrible idea. Of course, you could ask, because I have been arguing that you could throw the buttlet, could you throw such a giant Kligat? So part one, with my machete construction, no, it would fall apart, and that's good because in Germany where I live, throwing stars are illegal. So otherwise I would have built here a giant throwing star. For the rubber version, yes, you can, but in fact, the buttlet was easier to throw because the handles of this giant Kligat are so much in the middle, it's not so easy to generate force in a way that I don't hit myself. What I can, of course, do is I can grasp the weapon at one of the tips and then throw it off. Then it has a bit of the properties of some of these African throwing knives like the Hunga Munga or the Kepinga. So another interesting historical real life cross correlation of this thing, and therefore I think it's not as quirky as I originally thought. I hope these weird ideas of me gave you some inspiration, and I hope to see you around next time.